now. And so Sheru, I'm going to pass it off to you to start. Thank you again so much for joining us today. Great. All right, Sheru, whenever you're ready.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. So you've heard, my name is Sheru Muuo, and I'm going to take you through an interesting topic, at least on my end, the elements of a good survey. Next, please. So we're going to look at different aspects within this presentation. First is basically to understand why are we doing a survey, what's the importance of conducting a survey. Then we'll go into the nitty-gritties of how to plan for and conduct a survey. And then finally, we'll end up with an example of a typical survey that you may conduct or you can conduct, and it would be nice to also hear what people have to say regarding their own surveys that they've been doing. So I'm hoping that it will be an interactive session. Please feel free to ask as many questions as there's time for, and I'll do my best to respond to them. Next, please. So we've heard about the word survey many times, and it's increasingly becoming important even during this COVID-19 pandemic. A lot of questions are being asked. People are wondering what is happening. It's a new phenomenon. So surveys are generally methods that are used to gather data from a sample of people with the intention of generalizing the results to a larger population. So you basically are trying to collect data to make it understandable, and then using that data from the few people or the few institutions that you're collecting from, so that you can make a conclusion that is relevant to the general majority. It cuts across different sectors, including commerce, health, agriculture, politics, energy. When you hear surveys about who's the most preferred presidential candidate in your country, that's a kind of survey that is being implemented. It cuts across different areas, and it will be relevant to a lot of people who are interested in just understanding how things function, how their programs or their work functions. So I find that a very relevant tool to use. Next. So regarding this specific webinar, we're going to focus on businesses, but those who are not in the business sector can also, I looked through and I realized the aspects and the concepts are relevant. Why is it important to businesses specifically? The first thing is the environments are constantly changing. The new trends that are coming up. Before there was no social media, now there's social media. There are pandemics that we mentioned, different weather patterns determine how to respond to different situations. So for businesses, people need to keep track of all these trends and all these changes that are happening, so to adapt their functioning towards the different situations that are happening. And then in the midst of all that, maybe businesses want to identify different marketing strategies. So it's a new market that you're trying to get into, different population. You have a product you want to sell that you've not thought about. You were selling clothes, now you want to go into shoes. You don't know how to go about it. And also, if you've already come up with some decisions, if you've implemented an aspect that was not there before, and you want to understand how it's working. If within Chamber of Commerce you have conducted a training and you want to understand whether the training has been influential to your people, the people who've attended the training. So these are the kind of questions that you want to ask and are relevant to within the business sector. And it's valuable to be able to improve yourself, to improve your institution, and to improve the general environment that you're working in. Next, please. So when you're conducting a survey, there's a simple it's a simple 5-step process, and it's easy to remember. Only the nitty-gritties are the ones that you have to keep in mind. First, we'll go on with defining the problem. You need to understand what exactly you're trying to do. It could be a problem that you're trying to solve. It could be an opportunity that has just come up, and you're trying to figure out how to fit into that opportunity. Maybe you've received a grant and you're trying to develop some training, or you're trying to come up with a product, an app, and you want to see how people will respond to it. So you need to identify the problem. Secondly is to develop a plan of action. We will go into detail. This is the most, it's a step that I will take a lot of time on. And then there's, after developing the plan, then you go into collection of the data. And then after that, there's analysis and presenting your report. So I will not talk about the report presentation much because that was tackled in detail by Grace last time. But I just need to say that each and every step that I've highlighted here it can actually be a full course. Like you can actually do a full course on developing a survey plan or analysis of data. So what I'm presenting here is just a snapshot of each and every step. And then hopefully you can generate questions, you can generate interest that you can go and find more information about later. So what we'll do is that we'll go step by step, and then on how to conduct a survey. Next, please. So what do we mean by defining a problem or an opportunity? You basically want to understand what is it that you want to do. Do you want to understand how the your employee behavior? Do you want to understand how the response is to a specific product, how the market is behaving? And you need to be very specific as possible. So one challenge that people have is they have very big ideas, but how to tackle it is an issue. So when you have a problem, you need to define it properly, write it down, and then break it down into like simple objectives that are measurable. You know, the SMART objectives that people talk about: specific, measurable, achievable. What was R? Something. I forgot the R and T are. But they need to be things that are achievable and attainable. For example, if you want to understand your customer demographics, so the people who come to you and buy products, and you want to understand the kind of people, so that you tailor make certain products towards that demographic. For example, there's a famous lotion called Nivea. Before it was only for females, and maybe people started seeing males. A survey was probably conducted to see that males are actually increasingly using such products, and a product was developed to be tailor-made for men. Before, men never used to use makeup. I hear now they're starting to use makeup, cologne, things like that. So you can understand this can help you venture into areas that you've never ventured into before. So I've just given in blue like some examples of research questions or problems that you can define. For example, if you're trying to get information about the customer demographics, your question would be something like, who are the main consumers of a product X in Nairobi County in 2019? So you see, you've defined the actual product, you define where exactly you want to, where your target is, and in which period. So this specific question targets previous experience, so it was 2019, and then you want to use that data from 2019 to see if you can tailor make something within your business for 2020. The second example could be something like you're trying to establish a marketing plan for a certain service among the members. You want to make a certain product that that used to sell. You want to introduce an online service where people can order or to get the specific products, like the restaurants business that are now happening. They're turning to online, they're introducing delivery services, and you're trying to figure out how to market it. So you can say something like, what was the most effective marketing strategy for a certain service in the country in 2019? So you can see, you can use a past marketing strategy that was effective before, and use it for the next period. And then you can also use it to identify maybe customer expectations or needs that are of your customers, or of your clients, or of the members. So you've been offering, things have been status quo for a while, and you want to trying to understand maybe why people are dropping out, why certain products not going, things like that. So you can ask something like, what are the current customer expectations and needs regarding a certain service in a specific area? So these aspects need to be understood well. And thank you, Akin Kunle, because R stands for realistic. Thank you for that. Who remembers what T stands for? You can type it in the chat. So that's basically it regarding the defining of a research problem. Be specific, and write it, ideally write it down and break it down to the different aspects that you want to talk about. Next, please. So you've defined your problem. Now, what next? You need to understand. So we are now in step 2. You are supposed to try and figure out how to develop the survey plan. The survey plan is basically trying to come up with tools, processes, the aspects that are important in the conducting of the survey before you actually conduct the survey. But before that, thank you, Kenneth. It is for time bound. I see that. Thanks. You need to identify what type of research are you trying to conduct, what type of survey. So the type of survey is influenced by the type of research that you're trying to do. For example, 3 main categories are usually known. It could be an exploratory research. It's a research or a survey that has, it's about a topic that has not been understood. It is not understood. It's something new that is being introduced. You're trying to introduce it into a market. You're trying to establish a different service, a different type of training session, I think. And you don't know, it has never been done before, and you don't know what the response will be. This type of research usually involves a lot of like discussions with key stakeholders. You can do some secondary research, so you can go into the internet, see if there's any data that has been published around that, and then use it to analyze your to answer your specific question. I've given an example of Human Milk Bank. It's a project that was in an organization that I used to work in. What they were trying to do is they were trying to establish if women decided to donate their milk, breast milk, and store it somewhere, especially for women who could not breastfeed in areas that are low income, in areas that have issues with food, in areas that even HIV, for HIV positive mothers, if there are women who have extra milk, then they can store it for other people. So this was something that has never been heard of in the country. It has been done in other countries. So the question was now trying to go to different people, Ministry of Health, trying to understand from the women, trying to different hospitals, to basically figure out, is this something that is worth introducing before it's actually introduced? So that's the example of an exploratory type of research. Then there's a common type of research, which is what you're going to tackle today, is the descriptive type of research. This is like a topic that is known. You understand your market, you understand your product, you understand your members, but you want to specifically figure out specific aspects of those people, of the product. And it's usually, you can collect this data quantitatively. We'll discuss about quantitative and qualitative research later. But a lot is to do with like numbers, to do with categories of responses. You are trying to ask about age of the customer, sex, residence, preferences, things that have already been established. And they usually come about as a result of some exploratory research that has been carried out. And then the last one would be something like called causal research. Causal research is you're trying to, take an example of an experiment. It's known to be, you're trying to introduce something and you're trying to see if you introduce this, what will the effect be? So I've given an example there. If you have a restaurant and you're trying to play music in the restaurant, and you want to look at your sales to see if I introduce music to the restaurant, will people start coming? Will the food start coming? Will the customers increase? So it's an experiment that you're trying to do based on the kind of services or products that you have. So 3 types of research: exploratory, descriptive, and causal research. Next, please. So once you have the types of research that you're trying to figure out in mind, then we need to come up with the type of research design that you're to do. All this is like background information, background knowledge that you need to have before you actually come up with the survey. Other than identifying the type of research that you're doing, you come up with the design, and two types of research designs are normally known. And this is the cross-sectional or longitudinal. As you can see from the picture there, the first one is there are many people, and what you want to do, the magnifying glass is just selecting like 2 people. So you have a whole population, you want to go target a specific audience at a specific number of participants. You go collect data, go back, analyze, report the findings, and that's it. And make a decision about the findings that you get. Longitudinal are normally called like follow-up surveys. You collect data over time. This is normally important when you're trying to follow up change over time. They're more complex because first they're expensive, because you need to sort of keep people interested over time. How will you keep people asking similar type of questions over time? Usually involves maybe provision of incentives. But at the same time, they're very useful, because if you want to track change over time and the responses over time, then you can, these are the type of studies that you want to do. If you want to look at an effect of a drug or an effect of something that you've introduced, maybe it's a new product that you want to look at the effects over time, how the responses have been going within the duration of a year. So you can conduct a survey looking at the different responses of people over a span of 1 year, and see maybe the month of June, the product goes faster than the month of May, something like that. And that's the kind of decision that you have to make. Do you want it to be cross-sectional? Do you want it to be longitudinal? Next, please. The other thing that you need to understand is what kind of data are you trying to collect. 2 types of data exist in general, and they are qualitative and quantitative. And these types of data are usually guided by the type of research question. They're also guided by the type of research, as we said. Exploratory, you remember we talked about, if the exploratory, usually a lot of qualitative type of data is collected. If you look at this picture here, there are 2 pictures. The first one, someone puts an ice cream, like a box with ice cream, and it's free ice cream outside their restaurant or outside the business premises. And they want to see what the behavior is of people when they go and collect, whether or not they will take the ice cream. It's free. And the person behind there is hidden. This is a type of observation type of study. And they want to understand what are the numbers. So what the person finds is that only 1 in 30 takes the free ice cream. And that's the conclusion at the end of the day. 30 people have come, but only 1 person takes the ice cream, even though it's free. In the qualitative data collection, you want to explore. What did you feel? That's the person asking the surveyor. What did you feel when you saw the free ice cream? The person responds, excited, a little scared. And you can ask, why was that? So you see, they're trying to understand the reasons why, the reasons behind the feeling when they want to, that motivated them to get the ice cream. they were excited, maybe they're not sure, is it poisoned, why is it there, why is it free, things like that. So that's the difference between qualitative and quantitative. Qualitative, you're trying to understand reasons, the opinions, motivation, why they want to do a specific aspects. You can explore different aspects of the research question. It also serves as a background or a stepping stone for quantitative type of research. Quantitative is usually like numbers, counts, what you're trying to count. A lot of figures are used, graphs, and quantification type of data. So you see the types of research go hand in hand with the type of data that you're trying to collect. So once the problem, the question, the research questions are clear, the objectives are clear, then all these things will go together. Next, please.
And we actually have a quick question from Kenneth Kimayo from the Elgayo Mariquette CSOs network, and he asks, what's the difference between research and survey? I see the terms being used interchangeably.
Okay, thank you. It's true. People tend to use them interchangeably. So research is generally a broader term, because research generally it can involve things like plants, animals. You cannot conduct a survey on an animal or a plant. Research is basically asking questions. So research is a broader term. But when you ask about surveys generally tend towards asking people questions about themselves or about institutions, about their businesses, about different aspects. And it's true that it's used interchangeably. So we can say survey is a type of research, and it involves human subjects. I hope that's clear. If there's none, then you can, if it's not clear, then you can type any follow-up questions. Okay. So we can go on. Once you identify the type of research type, research design, and you know what type of data you're trying to collect, now we go into defining who are you collecting the data from and where are you collecting the data from. This need to be also very clear. If you're trying to get information from your suppliers, for example, maybe the supplies have been erratic and you want to understand why, or you want to understand your employees' attitude towards something that you've introduced, or something that has changed. Maybe the different timings have changed, the days have increased or decreased. What are their feelings are like towards a specific product, how their marketing attitude is. You can also specifically target customers. And from these, you can gauge between males and females, what the differences are. A specific age range. For example, if you're trying to find out an opinion about fast food, the generally age group to target is young people, or maybe families with young children, young families. If you're looking for maybe car products, then you would target, if majority will probably be males. Not to say that women are not interested in car products, but you get my drift. So it needs to be targeted of who you specifically want to collect the data from. You may be, if in a chamber of commerce, you have members that you're targeting, so you want to reach out to those specific members and see what the responses are towards a specific aspect. So these have to be clearly defined. Sometimes you want to, so you want to define specifically a specific age range. Sometimes you just want to understand from the general public what the situation is like. So it depends on what your interest is. The target location. You need to specify where exactly you're collecting your data. If your business is in the middle of the CBD, maybe that's the target market you want to introduce a specific product to. You can decide to position people at strategic locations to ask questions. and at specific times. So, you know, for example, I've given an example there. If you're trying to introduce a specific app and to market it, if you're introducing a rural area where there are no smartphones or no network, then that will not work. It needs to be, you need to justify. And this is very important at this point, because just like it's important to establish a business within the location is very important. It's the same thing with a survey. If you put it in if you do conduct a survey that's not relevant, then it will not provide you data that will help you make a good conclusion regarding your specific problem. But just to say that when you're doing your research, it's important to understand what's out there, what research has already been done. You can get ideas from similar type of work. People, I'm sure, like a lot of work is usually done about many different topics. And if it's a new product you're trying to launch, maybe there's something similar that has already been launched. So there's work that's probably there that you can refer from. You can also get a similar type of population and understand why that population was selected. And that is what you implement in your study. So defining the population is important towards, and the location, very important towards what you're trying to understand. Next, please. So now you know you want to collect data from a specific population. You want to you've identified your audience. You've identified the location. Now, what are you going to use to collect data with? I'll take you back. We talked a little bit about exploratory research that is linked to the type of question, which is linked to the type of data that you collect, which is now to be linked with the technique that you're going to use to collect the data. I mentioned about that human milk bank example. You go into key stakeholders and conduct interviews. Okay, sometimes, so there are different types of interviews that exist. You can do intercept interviews. This is where you basically just go randomly asking questions, not randomly, but in terms of like, if you want to position people at a mall, for example, and ask about what their needs are for food or clothes or maybe mobile phone accessories. Or you are, so these are things that, so people, the participants had not planned to do the interview. They were just interrupted. As they walked out, and they were asked questions. Then there could be arranged interviews. Arranged interviews are you plan to meet somebody at a specific time, and you say the person is prepared, and you go and do the interview. Similar to what happens on TV. For them to interview people, they needed to have planned to sit down with certain people and to talk to them. Telephone interviews, this is on the phone. Usual challenge with this is that you need to have their numbers in advance. So if you don't have numbers of people in advance, then it's difficult to conduct interviews. Then there are interviews called in-depth interviews. You may or may not have heard of them. These are types of interviews which are mostly qualitative. So you want to get a lot of information from maybe a few people who can give a lot of information. These are maybe your regular customers, and you want to understand their opinions, or your regular members who you feel can give and are willing to offer feedback from time to time. So you want to ask questions that are more open, open-ended. Open-ended means they have no like A, B, C, D, or they have no options. So this also is common exploratory type of research. Key informant interviews, I've mentioned, you want to ask specific stakeholders. You want to talk to the Ministry of Trade, for example, Minister of Agriculture, about the products that are going. You want to understand, from government stakeholders, from different supply chains, different representatives from supply chains. So you have questions that are open-ended, people to give you as much information as possible, and then after that you can analyze. So these are types of interviews that exist. I see questions. Maybe I can take the first one from Alan Mukisira. Thanks for that. What's the difference between a research and a study? I must say I have myself used them interchangeably. But I know the word study has been used more in academic circles because you're trying to understand aspects of maybe a population or animals, plants, your participants. So in my understanding, I think the research and study, I use the two interchangeably, and it's to learn from a specific aspect. Now, in some cases, when you're doing a business and it's your own personal type of research, so for example, like a market survey, your own, so it's reflecting your own business, and you want to understand response to a product that you've specific, maybe a specific type of food that was not there, or a drink that is not there. So I've not had that being called a type of study, because that's usually just a survey that's to understand what you feel. But usually a study is something that maybe a larger group of people can learn from and they can study from, as opposed to research. But for the majority of the cases, research and study is usually the same thing. Then research for development, difference between research for development and research for academic progression. Is there a difference between research for development and research for academic progression? Well, now in my understanding, because I've done both, academic progression here, I'm thinking something to do with a project for your undergrad, or a project for your master's or PhD. You're trying to come up with something that to give you a degree. And then for development, I'm thinking something like you want to improve the situation on the ground. So for example, you're introducing my examples are very health-based because I'm biased towards health. So there's something called kangaroo mother care, where I'm sure some of you know. And then it's for premature babies, where you tie them around, like skin to skin contact. And it's something that you're trying to introduce to the people on the ground and the women on the ground. And and then you want for people to learn that, and for them to embrace that, so that premature babies stop dying, because it has been proven that it works, So both types of research are generally guided by the research question. So you can have the same type of research for development and for academics. So you can talk about the kangaroo mother care for mothers, and then for academic progression, you can look at the response towards women in a specific area towards kangaroo mother care. You see, so so I don't think there's much difference. It's just now what your target audience is, what your target eventual goal is. One is to graduate, get a degree. The other one is maybe to improve the community, to improve the situation on the ground, to improve your work. That's what I can say. So there's a question. There's a comment, I think, that don't read out loud. It's just taking such questions after you get through the presentation. Okay. So, so there's a request that we can keep the remaining questions to the end of the presentation because of time. And we'll go to the next section on data collection techniques. It's still a continuation of, so we do interviews as a type of data collection techniques. Then the self-administered surveys. Self-administered survey is where you give somebody a paper and pencil at the end of, maybe at the end of something, what I've come commonly to see is in restaurant, people give you a piece of paper, please fill. And then they can give you electronic platforms where you can, a link is shared and you're supposed to answer questions. And there are different types of softwares that have been developed, such as ODK, Open Data Kit, to collect such information. Next, please. I mentioned focus group discussions. These are where you sit down as groups. There's a limited type of group and you want to generate as much information as possible from like a discussion. More exploratory, more is if when you want to get more information about a specific topic and you want to understand different opinions at the same time. And then there's observation. That ice cream example that I gave, you're sitting behind somewhere hiding, or not, well, you're not really hiding, but you're observing. And there's a checklist and you see how many people have got the ice cream. Mystery clients or mystery shoppers. This is something that I've implemented that I think is very interesting. And it's used for like, if you want to see the response to a specific service. We wanted to understand in one of the examples that I can remember is that we had introduced youth-friendly services to health facilities, trained them on how to do it, but we are not sure that they're going to implement it. So we told them that, okay, at a certain time in advance, within January to March, somebody will come into your health facility and they'll see whether or not you're implementing what we taught you. So they're not sure of when you're going to go, but they've already given you permission. So you go in and then send your field interviewers, they act as clients or they act as customers. They see how your response is. They see how you're treating the customers, see your behavior. And then after that, you can use that to say that this is whether the training worked or not. Secondary data is using data that is already published. So these are the type of techniques. So briefly, interviews, on self-administered surveys, focus group discussions, observations, mystery client or mystery shopper surveys, and use of secondary data. Next, please. So when you're developing your tool, you need to also understand the sample size and sampling. Remember when we started, we said the sample has to be representative of a population. So it needs to be credible enough that if you're trying to see the response of a certain aspect or a certain training or a certain service to your population, to the market, then it needs to be representative, okay? So a lot of times it needs some statistical calculation, which I'll not go into here because it's a whole discussion for another time. But you need to see that the sample is not small enough so that it doesn't influence any change, but it's not also big enough because very big samples tend to use a lot of time and resources that maybe slightly smaller samples could be able to have made a conclusion anyway. So you see the type of surveys that you get on TV about your preferred presidential candidate, for example. They've not asked you specifically, but you can see that the majority of people prefer so-and-so candidate A compared to candidate B because they've reached a sample of a population. Different techniques also exist, and this is also needs to be put in place, needs to go in hand with data collection. Examples could be simple random, where you have a sampling frame. Sampling frame is like a group of people that are already in a database, are already part of your membership, are already, like you already have all of them together. And then you randomly select. Then there's purposive, where you're targeting a specific type of people. People who visit these sessions are your type of people. Systematic is maybe it uses a specific system. So for example, every 10th client, I will ask this question. Every 5th person, I will ask this other question. Snowballing is where you don't know actually your participants. So you're going to a completely new area and you're looking for people who supply maize, for example, and you don't know who the next supplier is. So you ask this maize supplier, please give me a contact of the next maize supplier. And that person gives you the next maize supplier. So those are kind of types of sampling techniques. I've just given an example there. If you have a database in a list of members, then and you have where they are from, a PO box address saying this is PO box a certain county. So what you can do is you can use the number of counties that are there, randomly select from those counties if you want 5 members per county, and use that. So you can use a stepwise type of approach. First is purposive, meaning you're specifically going into a specific member database. From that, select the counties that you want to reach. From that, randomly select 5, you see? So it could be a stepwise type of approach. And that's all about sampling for now. Next, please. Designing tools. Now, when you're doing tools, it's also dictated by the type of question, the type of data that you're trying to collect, the type of technique that you're trying to collect. So generally for interviews, you develop questionnaires. For observations, you can develop checklists. Interviews can also use checklists. Focus group discussions, in-depth interviews, key informant interviews generally use interview guides. So they are broader type of questions. So these are tools that you can develop. Questionnaire development is also a whole different other topic, but the bottom line is the questions need to be specific and need to be targeted, not very open, and do not be biased. So also something I need to mention is that the tools, you can use one or more tools. You can say you want to conduct focus group discussion to understand what the general feeling is like. And then for a specific audience, you want to target a specific aspect. Okay, so the problem generally guides what you want to do. And you can use both open-ended and closed-ended questions. So for surveys, generally, which are generally usually descriptive, and you can use multiple choice questions, which are easy if people is following up over time, longitudinal type of work, and you want them to use as little time as possible, or you're working with people who are very busy, health workers, or people who don't have time, big bosses somewhere, and they don't have very much time, a lot of time. So you can use very short type of questions over a period of time. So this, you can group the responses into different aspects, or you can leave them open for people to talk as much as they want. Next, please. Okay. So now you've developed your questionnaire, you've identified your people, your location, you've identified, you're more or less like everything is clear. Now, what is your plan of action? You need to find out whether you need staff to conduct the survey. Is it self-administered? How many counties, how many areas are you going to? Do you need staff to go and collect the data? What kind of data gadgets are you going to use for in-depth interviews, key informant interviews, things like that? You need recorders to record the interviews. If it's online, you could get people to ask using mobile phones or tablets with software installed in them. If it's self-administered, you can use things like SurveyMonkey or Google Forms. So these are the nitty-gritty. So once all the other aspects are clear, then now you need to plan for the gadgets, plan for the staff, plan for the number of days of data collection, conduct mock interviews before that, see how long a questionnaire takes to be filled, estimate that to determine how many hours in a day you need, which will help determine how many days you need. And then also something important you need to figure out is whether there is need for incentives. This is important. Because incentives can influence or bias data collection. In some cases, it's important because you want to keep people interested. If it's a long survey, I have been involved in surveys, in a questionnaire process that has taken one hour, 1 or 2 hours, and they're talking about sensitive topics. So you need the person there for a long time. So what are you going to do? Are you going to provide them lunch? Are you going to provide them transport? Something that you need to take care of is the incentive should not influence the participants, should not sway their answers. So we need to be careful about that. Next, please. The other aspect that you need to think about is you should not force people to answer questions. There's a whole issue about ethics, their data, security, respecting people, that this is their data, and different ways can be used. So for example, you can decide not to use IDs, don't use their names, don't use, like data should be stored properly, use passwords, store data in rooms that are lockable or cabinets that are lockable if it's paper-based. So it's more of ensuring that the data that you collect is stored securely, and not everyone can access this data. And not people should not identify that this is the response that you're talking to. And this is just basically for protection. And this needs to be clear before you interview the participants. Otherwise, they will not provide this data. Next, please. Okay, so now you've planned yourself. Now you go into data collection. I will not spend so much time because basically it involves going and implementing what you've been planning for. One thing that I need to mention is piloting, which is basically also testing the questionnaire. And then piloting means you can go on the ground, sample a few or request a few businesses, please participate in this survey, see how the response is going to be. Get people even within your circles to enter questions, to fill in the questionnaires, estimate the time, estimate the quality, the flow of the question. Sometimes the flow is not very good. And you can take time to modify the questionnaire. The questionnaire tool development process, remember, is an ongoing process. Even during data collection, some questions tend to change. So it's important to get that as fast as possible so that the data is not influenced. Then collect the data. As you're collecting the data, as data is coming in, please remember to keep on cleaning. Some data may be missing. Some people may decide not to answer. If you get many people not answering a specific question or not answering a specific questionnaire, then you know there's something wrong with that, or some questionnaire needs to be modified, or it's not answered correctly, or it's not, so the understanding is different from how you want to frame, you framed it. So the way you frame the question and you want to hear the responses can guide you. And this is also helped by the piloting process. Next, please. Okay, so you have your data. It could be quantitative, qualitative, if you remember what that is. You've taken your full month, or you can do a longitudinal type of study where you've looked at it over time. You have all the data in a database, and what next? Remember your research questions, remember your objectives. Those are the ones that are supposed to help you decide. So when you're designing the problem, when you're coming up with a problem, or when you're coming up with objectives, think about the analysis also much earlier. So we need to mention that the software that is available for use, especially with quantitative data, there are things you can use MS Excel, SPSS, which are available. More specialized are Stata R for quantitative data. R is good for visualization. For qualitative data, you can use NVivo, Atlas TI. These are software that can help in coding the type of responses that you get. So it takes time. Analysis is a whole, it can be very tricky, especially if you've not cleaned your data, if you've not coded your data well. It could be something that needs time, sometimes you can need additional assistance. You can request for a statistician specifically to help that, or a data analyst. Then you go into data analysis, summarizing what your data is saying. This is guided by the research questions. What are you looking for? What majority of people like this product? Majority of people prefer this training, such kind of things. Look for trends, and then use that data to create tables, graphs, charts that will be interesting for your audience. And this will help in now the development of the report. So we are at step 4 now, analysis of the data. Now we can go to 5. And then report finding. As you notice, the last few steps have been, I've talked briefly about them, mostly because data collection is usually like a process that you go to the ground and collect data and you come back. So that is usually dictated a lot by the type of tools, the type of research that you're conducting. Analysis, the same way. Many methods exist regarding analysis. Could be descriptive frequencies. It could be regression analysis. You're trying to do Poisson distributions. You're trying to understand the differences between different categories of people. So those are important to understand. Now, the analysis will now feed into how you want to disseminate the data. Do you want to create pie charts? Do you want to create tables? Are you drawing maps in case of GIS work? Are you trying to map hotspots? Think about who your audience is. Tailor it to the audience. That's what Grace talked about the other time. If it's to a very specialized audience, they want to make it such that it's to their level. If it's people on the ground or a wide range of audience, it needs to reach the lay people. If it's something that is supposed to go to the media, what kind of aspects are attractive? See, like the two people there are presenting maps, they're presenting different types of pie charts and bar graphs. Then you want to look at what output are you bringing. Is it just a report? Is it a publication? Is it something that you want people to learn from? Is it you want to create a policy brief, something that you need to push for government to take into consideration? To change a specific tax policy. You tell them that these people, the businesses here are responding to this tax reduction or tax increase in a specific way. This is how they respond, this is how it's affecting them. So you basically push that information forward. And then you make connections between those research questions that you wanted to find out. So what are remember about customer profile you were asking? So you understand your customer profile, and then now you target your products towards those customers. You package it properly. You even position products in a specific place to target different type of people. So this report is basically targeted towards a specific audience. Okay, next please. So you've talked about the 5 different steps. And as I've said, there's a lot towards these different steps. And all of them need time. And you need to plan in advance what exactly you want to do. So for example, if you want to conduct a survey, I've just given an example. A National Chamber of Commerce is planning a survey to describe challenges faced by its members during the COVID-19 pandemic. So you want to understand how your members are responding and how businesses are being affected by this COVID pandemic. So an example question could be something like, what is the impact of COVID-19 to businesses in Kenya? You see, in Kenya means you're targeting the whole country. So you need a sample that is representative of the country, which means a lot of resources need to go into it. A lot of time needs to go into it. And you're targeting businesses. You can specifically develop your objectives. So for example, you can look at businesses in a specific county. You can look at specific type of businesses. So you can look at, so as we go on, you'll see number 2 is developing the survey plan. So what are you planning to do? We can decide to conduct 2 types of research. One, a cross-sectional, where the Chamber of Commerce decides to send to all members in its database a specific survey to see the responses. Or you can say, you can target specific businesses that have been affected and you follow them up over time. For example, we know things like the transport and hospitality areas have been affected a lot. So you see this type of people, identify what kind of businesses. Is it businesses that have been existent for the last 1 year, 5 years? If you say 3 months, then you will not have your target audience because 3 months is when COVID happened. So you need to know before and after, before, during, and after. Okay. Your target locations need to be defined, and then you can carry out 2 short online self-administered questionnaires. You know, business people are they're very busy, and you can decide not to go to them. And even now you can decide, because of social distancing, you'll just send them links instead of going there and face-to-face. Ask both open-ended and closed-ended questions. Then you can send the questionnaires via SurveyMonkey, collect the data, analyze the data, and then sometimes you don't get responses from everyone. It's okay. Some people are busy, some people have dropped out, they're not interested. Here, we get response from about 60%, create tables, charts, and then report your findings. For example, you can forget findings like the worst affected enterprises were this, and this. This is from the general surveys from the members, from SMEs were the ones that are mostly affected. and key enterprises that were affected. So the key issues that were affected were turnover, sales, supplies, things like that. Next, please. So I just looked for an example, an online example of similar type of survey that has been done actually by World Bank and the government of Ethiopia. They were trying to find out the impact of COVID-19 on their businesses, and they were asking what kind of financial stresses were being faced by their farms. They did two rounds of data collection between April and June, and they used phone surveys. So they were just calling them and asking them questions. Majority of them, you can see the one in light blue is the first round of questions. So they asked first round, and then the second round was is in dark blue. As you can see, rent is a major issue that was affected among businesses. And then there's payment of invoices was another challenge, payment of other expenses, staff wages, and repayment of loans. So you can tell that rent is a big issue. Then after that, people should act on it and see how to deal with the situation. So this you can actually check out and see how it's been presented online. Next, please. So overall, the main goal of this research or survey, let's call it survey and not research, is to put your research into action. So once you've decided, you've heard that that the type of business that are mostly affected are from a specific type of sector. How can you help them? Are you going to reduce maybe taxes for them? Are you going to, if it's a group of people who you found your customer profile are women, and majority of women are the ones who are buying a specific product, or children are starting to get into a specific product or getting interest into a service, or an app is generating a lot of negative feedback. What is the plan? Are you going to withdraw the app? Are you going to withdraw the product? Are you going to generate more of the products? Okay, so in general, that is that is how to ensure that research gets noticed. One major thing that a lot of researchers do, or they collect a lot of data but don't use it, or they want a specific aspect, but a lot of data sits there not being used because maybe it was not needed in the first place. You see, so the questions really are important when you want to develop a plan of action. Okay, next. I think that's the end. Yes, thank you. That's the end of my presentation, and thank you for being a good audience.
Thank you, Sheru. That was wonderful. And I think as you were going, we received some great questions, and I think now would be a great time to start a Q&A session. So for everyone in attendance, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A feature, or if you'd like to ask a question out loud, you can use the raise your hand and we'll unmute you. But we have one question here in the chat from Alan, and he asks, what are the approaches when you are considering research with a human subject compared to lab research?
Okay, now I don't know what you mean by approaches, but different types of research use different techniques. I give you an example. Lab research, of course, so for example, if you're doing human subjects, you need consenting, and you're asking questions to people. If it's lab type of research, then you're looking at specimen, or you're looking at plants, then you don't need consent, okay? If you're looking at behavior of soil, testing one soil sample compared to another type of soil sample and seeing if there's any difference, maybe because of fertilizer. You know, I'm just giving examples off my head. Of course, things like consent do not apply. They will depend on the type of methods that generally are put in place for soil sample analysis. Okay, so the approaches vary based on the research and type of question. So, okay, so I'm going to use an example where you use human subjects compared to lab research, where you're asking questions, just asking questions to people, or drawing blood. from people, and then you're going to use that the blood for analysis. So so the procedures matter. You will in addition to just normal consenting, you will have to employ the blood analysis methods, whatever it is that you're trying to analyze in the blood. Experimental aspects will be needed, more numbers in the lab aspects, more quantitative data collection compared to qualitative, that kind of aspect. So the two different types of approaches differ based on who your target audience is and what your goals are. Okay.
Great, thank you. We have another question from Kenneth. And Kenneth, you asked, what percentage accuracy is sampling technique compared to other methods? And so I think the question here is what is the accuracy of sampling technique as in comparison to other methods of surveying, okay, or other types of questions?
So what I gather, because the other aspect is now surveying the whole population, right? So because there are two, it's only two. It's either you survey everyone or you take a sample. Okay, so in terms of accuracy, now that is where there's the formula. So generally, if you survey everyone, if you get everyone in your database to answer a specific question, because you're putting in the plan of action for those members, then it's more accurate than if you take a sample. That's definite. If you're asking questions, so for example, a country census, and if you want to see the income levels within a country, so that's more accurate because it's a larger population. Okay, and that's why it's very expensive because a census is like you generalize. It's for everyone. Everyone is answering the question, but for a sample, it's only a few people. So sampling techniques use formulas because that is not all surveying the whole population is not always possible. So formulas are generally used to get the sample. So the level of accuracy, so it's less. That's all I can say, because it's less compared to the full population. Yeah.
Great, thanks. We have a few questions from Lars Benson, who's the Regional Director of SIPE Africa in Washington, D.C. His first question is, where do you go to see samples of good surveys and perhaps reports of survey data?
Good. So when I was preparing for this presentation, I actually went to the International Labour Organization, ILO website. I saw reports of that. A lot of surveys. And the other thing I need to mention is that when you're developing questions, it's good to look at other people's surveys and other questions, especially questions that have a huge representation of the participants. So they have a large data collection sample. For business type of questions, I looked at ILO, I looked at PwC. I saw some research done by PwC. They're also looking at impact of COVID, which is also something interesting. I looked at some UN websites, but you can also look at country type of data. The country type of data, demographic health data, some demographic data, economic surveys that have been done in the country. I looked at the most recent data. So it depends on what you want to survey. So a lot of countries, like I know we have an economic survey, we have a demographic survey, a country type of survey. We have companies that have done surveys, market research type of companies. In Kenya, there are things like surveys like Ipsos Synovate that are done online. So when I was Googling type of market surveys, there are very many that you can see that are private type of market survey companies.
Okay. And then yeah. I think as a follow-up to that, when you were doing all this research, were there any surveys that you think would have been good to conduct that you didn't necessarily find in your research, particularly relating to chambers of commerce and associations?
Any type of research that I've not seen anybody do yet. What I know, what I've seen is that a lot of research that has been done is mostly quantitative, and a lot of them use graphs and charts and things like that. Maybe because it's easy, and it's easy for people to identify with and to see. Qualitative type of research or service, I have not seen very much. Maybe because when you introduce something new, people prefer looking at numbers. Maybe business people like numbers because they're dealing with money. I don't know. But opinions of opinions of people and discussion of how they feel about something, and this is where now behavioral surveys come about them, and they're increasingly now becoming common. Starting to realize that opinions about an app, how do they feel about it, and what is the opinion, what motivated you to use this, the motivation behind a certain product, not necessarily how many products are being used or who is using the product, what is motivating you to use the product. So I think that's a little bit of a gap regarding Chamber of Commerce or business associations. So qualitative type of research, because I know once you understand the motivation towards doing something, then you can maybe tailor your product or service towards that aspect. Yeah.
Great. This is a good follow-up to that. David Ochoma, who's in Nairobi and is with the National Commission for Science, Technology, and Innovation, says, research has shown that morals or values may affect us inconsistently. How does that impact a qualitative survey?
Okay. So I'll give an example. Morals, religion, culture, how it affects qualitative survey. So it basically biases a lot, but it's biased understandably, because you're basically, a human being is basically has their own principles and standing behind something. So for example, a recent debate on vaccination, for example, people now are not going for vaccination. They say it's associated with autism. There are people who are saying the current vaccines are introduced so that they make them infertile. Some people say, or family planning type of methods are because God says in the Bible that you should not control, he's the one to control, things like that. So this is an important aspect to collect, and that's why I'm saying a huge gap is the qualitative aspect, the motivation behind it. That is important to capture, because using that, then you can tailor make, you can see that people are responding to this service or this product because of their belief in this. So what are you planning to do about it? Maybe you can do education type of interventions, go and educate people about the importance of using this as opposed to another product. So, and I think that's important in qualitative. That usually is a gap when you're doing quantitative surveys. When you're getting emotions into it, getting religious backing, or you don't believe in something, that can tailor, it can help you better explain how your market is behaving. Yeah.
Great. We have a question from Patty Hill, who works with the evaluations team in SIPE DC, and I also shared this question. Could you speak a bit more about survey fatigue and that experience?
Okay. So I give examples. So survey fatigue, sometimes, as I mentioned, you can be conducting a very long interview, very sensitive interview. For example, if you want to understand maybe views about a specific product, a specific service, maybe you want to understand about your employee and you're trying to get as much information as possible. The other type of fatigue is if you're collecting data over a long time. Okay, I've done that. We've been a surveillance system where we've been collecting data for about 10 or so years. Some people have been collecting data for 20 plus years. Okay, the same type of data all the time. How old are you? Things like that. So first, it depends on what your objectives are, but that is something that is common with regards to surveying and research in general. Things that people have used to mitigate or to deal with survey fatigue is the incentive aspect I was talking about. For example, if you're asking questions to a specific type of group, you can decide to give like a sample of something, free incentive, or you can decide to implement something or improve. So an example could be like you're asking a specific community about health-seeking behavior. As I said, I'm biased towards health, but health-seeking behavior. What you can do is that over that 20-year period, maybe you improve the infrastructure of the hospital, for example, or once in a while create some community-led initiatives. If you're collecting data from a group of people, you can offer a service that was not necessarily related to what you're doing, but something that people see that you care and you're there and your data is being used. And that leads me to the other point that the data that you collect needs to be used. So the people from whom you're collecting data from, they need to see that this is the data that you're collecting from me, how you're using it. So a lot of publicity or feedback to the community, to the people that you're collecting data from really helps, because they can use that data for themselves. They can see how their market is behaving. When you tell them that they prefer this product over this product, or this service is not being utilized well, then they can see that you've done this research, this is the kind of feedback that you've received, the feedback is useful, this is how it was put into action. So continue communication with the people with the people that you're collecting data from, and not being seen as people who go and collect data and leave. And that I found is very
Great, thank you. We have a question from Kunle in Lagos. It says, I can see you mention the use of secondary data last, and some don't tend to be too comfortable with using this. Under what conditions do you use secondary data?
okay. So I talked about one instance where, like the exploratory type of research, where you don't know anything about a specific topic, and you want to understand what has been done. So you can go back and if there's a body that, for example, that an economic survey that has been done about a country, and they already have this massive amount of data that they have, and you want to look at maybe the transport industry. So they have not analyzed that data. You want to look at transport industry and how it's influencing a specific type of market. So you can use that data collected maybe last year or last 2 years, and that data, analyze it, and that will be used to inform your survey industry or your business going forward. Okay, so that's the kind of research that you can use. Another type of secondary survey is maybe if data has been collected over time and you basically want to use it. So some people for academic purposes. So somebody was talking about academics, and maybe they're trying to figure out where that fits in. A lot of PhDs and some masters, though masters they don't advocate for using secondary data. They prefer you going to the ground and collecting that data yourself, because it basically represents your current status now as is. But if you're not able to get maybe a wide range of people or a wide range of participants, and the only data that is available is from data that has already been collected and that is available, then you can use that. So basically, why it's recommended to use primary, we call it primary data collection, is because it's focusing on the time now. Secondary data is the past, so it's a little bit outdated. But if it's the only source of data that is available, then you can use that. And you only, maybe sometimes you don't have the resources to actually do your data yourself. You don't have the resources to collect your data yourself. So what you can do is you can use data that has already been collected and explain that, why you did that.
Great. So we have a few more questions. One came in asking you to speak a bit more about sending questionnaires via SurveyMonkey. For you, Sheru, is that your preferred method of online surveying?
So for me, the most common type of work that I've done is mostly like ODK or using a tablet. Before it was using a PDA or paper-based. Online, SurveyMonkey has its pluses and pros and cons. The main con is that it's limited. Like if it's only free to a specific number of questions, so you can only use it for short surveys. For example, just 10 questions, and if that's the kind of information that you want to make your conclusion about a specific aspect, then that's fine. If you want to understand why, for example, set a date for maybe a trade event among 10 people or among the people in your group, and then ask them to tell them to tell you your preferred date or time or month, for example. That's something simple that you can do within a short time. But if you want more detail, then you need longer type of surveys, which now needs programmers and people who can actually put in data. Design questions for yourself. Sometimes if you also have the resources to do paper-based and transform it to electronic, then that's fine. So SurveyMonkey, as I said, easy to do. You can do on the go. You can actually do it yourself. The negative part is that it's limited.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, and then we have a question from Alan. We didn't speak as much about focus group discussions, but the question here is related to focus group discussion questions. Particularly, how do you design a focus group discussion so that it's not dominated by the loudest voices in the room, maybe 1 or 2 people in a group of 10? How do you make it so that there's equal participation in order to get better results?
Okay. So generally the questions will, you will not have any influence on the questions because you've already set the questions when you go into a group, a discussion. A technique that have been used is calling out people to actually respond. So you notice that first, when you're selecting the focus group discussion participants, you ideally try and select the most talkative people. So in general, when you're selecting the participants, remember when you're talking about who is your target audience, you want to ideally passive sampling is used to select specific people who are very talkative, who are good at giving their opinions, and who will give you a lot of information. Now that said, and in that group are the people who are the loudest and the most talkative. So when you call out people, you're not allowed to use names in focus group discussions. You'll call them maybe by numbers, A, B, or letters, ABC, participant 1, what do you feel about this? Participant 2, what do you think about this? So that I found is very important. Sometimes it's the way the questions have been framed. So some people are not able, maybe have different levels of understanding. So you can try asking questions in different ways so that you see if other people are able to speak better, and can understand questions differently. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And my final question, Sheru, actually goes back to your question about SurveyMonkey. So if there is anybody in attendance here who is interested in doing a survey, particularly in the current environment with COVID-19, what would you recommend as the best way to, the best platform for them to use, and then the best way to distribute that to the potential for it to be completed?
Okay. Again, I go back to such question and the length of the questionnaire and the target audience. So all this, as you see, it's all interconnected. Okay. Mm-hmm. Reason being is if it's a long type of, if you want to get a lot of information from this, if it's more than 10 questions, definitely, and I assume it will be more than 10 questions in SurveyMonkey. I need to mention that you can use SurveyMonkey for more than 10 questions, but you have to pay for it. So it's okay if there's an additional feature where you can actually add in more questions, but you have to pay for the additional service of adding more questions. So that's okay. I know Google Forms has a type of platform where you can enter your questions. I think You can actually send it to more people. You can actually put in more questions. There are some online type of surveys. I have not used them before myself, but as I was working on this presentation, I saw some actually, they give you a free type of platform where you just enter data, send the link. So there are some that are already existing. So, but what I've used myself is mostly SurveyMonkey and Google Forms.
Great. And do you think that respondents are more likely to complete it if a survey is emailed to them, if it's sent via WhatsApp, or maybe if they receive a phone call and then the link is shared later? What do you think the best way is in terms of gathering responses?
Okay. So again, understanding your audience. If you have a database, so why I'm thinking out loud is because first you also need to think about the funding, the number of people that you have to ask the questions. Reason being is that if you're able to record phone calls. So for me, if there are people that you already have in your database and you already have their phone numbers, and the people who do not mind being bothered, maybe it's a one-off type of a survey, okay, and you have your questions and you want, it's more of exploratory type, okay. So you just want open and for them to give as much information as possible. What are your challenges with regards to COVID? And they'll bring it all these issues about my employees, I've had to let go, tax issues, timing, all those things. You can start something like that first, okay, and see what the responses are. After that, you see that probably you have, like for example, the challenges could probably be the same among different businesses. Then you can put an online type of a survey, okay. So if you can do like something exploratory with a few people first, then you you develop an online survey where you've already set all your options, right? Like you've already identified. So challenge number 1 could be rent, as what we saw for Ethiopia's study. Then number 2, payment of invoices. Number 3, because before you didn't know all these challenges. That's what I'm saying. Like starting from a point where you don't know anything. So you can start with a few of those for an interview, start with like an exploratory type of research, then go into like more of an online type of survey where you can send them links. Once you've developed this exploratory research will help you formulate the proper questions and proper options, and then you can use that as links and then send them out.
Great, thank you. And I think that is all the questions we have today. So I first just want to thank you, Sheru, for presenting today and being so in depth on the elements of a good survey. We're really fortunate to have had you with us, and we're very grateful. I also want to thank all of our attendees who are here with us today, and thank you for joining and always attending our SIPE webinars. So I want to thank my colleagues, Ryan Musser is the program officer with SIPE Africa, as well as the SIPE Africa Regional Director, Lars Benson, who's with us today as well. And I would like to invite all of you to join us again at this same time next week for our webinar on conducting a risk assessment for money laundering with Jim Wright. Some of you may know Jim, he's presented before within SIPE's anti-corruption network, but we want to bring his expertise to anybody who's interested in learning about conducting risk assessments with money laundering. So we will be sending out a follow-up email and we'll have this recording on SIPE's website, as I mentioned. But thank you again for joining us. Thank you, Sheru, and we're very grateful, and we will hopefully see you all next week. All right, goodbye, everybody.